In today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast, we're going to go through the 5 best available prospects in round 2 for the Detroit Pistons, who select at number 37. We'll start off with Adou Theiro and talk about why I think he could be a really good fit for the Pistons, or a really good pick for the Pistons. We'll talk about that coming up.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I am your host, Ku Khahil. You can find me over on Twitter at Ku Khahil. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And make sure you guys head over to the Substack. We're nearing 500 subscribers over there. I just dropped a new article going over the Pistons half-court offense, long-term fit of their starters, and some of the things I'm hearing about their interest in the potential shooting 5 this summer. I broke all of that down, so check that out over there. I appreciate all the support. But let's go ahead and get right into it because we're not going to be here for long. We're only going to be here about 35 minutes. Let's dive right into it. How round 1 is finished. It was certainly a bunch of interesting stuff. Especially with the Pelicans. The Pelicans, you know, they did some fun things. The Nets also first team ever to take 5 people in the first round. It's crazy. And somehow each pick got worse. But the Pistons sit at the top of the second round with pick 37. Before we get into any prospect, though, I do just want to get your thoughts on just the idea of best player available versus fit, because I feel like especially later in the draft, that becomes a big topic of discussion. So where do you stand with that whole conversation?
I think best player available is always dependent on fit. You know, you can't, if you've got a coach, for example, that's only ever going to play a drop, scheme defensively, and then you go and you bring in, a switch big, like you're not going to, it's not going to do anything for that guy. He's not going to develop the way you think he is. He could have the NBA 2K 99 potential rating. It's never going to get there because your coach doesn't want to do what he can do. Or if you've got 3 guys ahead of somebody in the rotation, it doesn't matter that they've got all the potential in the world. And so, the question is best player available a measurement of potential? Is it a measurement of their contribution right now? It's always, I think, a philosophy where it becomes, whatever's the most convenient definition that day is what people, use best player available for. So to me, it's, you got to look at your staff, you got to look at your team and say, okay, what can we do to make this player excel? And, look at those kind of projections and say, okay, that's what we think the best player is today. So I think it definitely, every team's board and what the BPA is for every team is going to be a little different.
All right, fair enough. Let's go ahead and get into the prospects now. We have 5 prospects we're going to talk about today. The first one I want to start off with is Adou Theiro. Now, ESPN has him as the 4th best remaining prospect in the second round. I talked with the scout today that felt like he was the best player available. Just before we get Hal's thoughts, this is ESPN's verdict on him. It says he showed significant progress as a junior, but will have to make strides with the shooting and overall consistency to play a role at the NBA level. His defensive upside is apparent given his physical tools, and his trajectory over his 3 collegiate seasons make him an interesting development swing. All right, so Hal, what's your thoughts on Theiro? He is obviously, it seems like a guy that needs to improve his jumper, obviously. It sounds like another guy kind of like Ron and Asar, but seems like there's some, at least with the guy I spoke to today, has some really high upside. Where are you at with him?
Yeah, I mean, he's your prototype wing physically, right? He's your 6'7" body, your 7-foot wingspan, monster defender, high activity, can move really well. So like Asar, like Ron on that end, he's a guy who should be able to come into the NBA right away and give you, motor and impact defensively. The problem is offensively, he's also like Ron and Asar, where, the shooting isn't there yet. Maybe there's a little more touch there. He shot almost 50% in the mid-range this year on kind of floaters and little pull-ups, but he hasn't shot well from 3, not in several years. Doesn't have an amazing free throw percentage. So there's not a lot of great indicators there that says he's going to come in, and be able to take minutes at the 3 right away. And my bigger concern for him is he's pretty good at like putting the ball on the deck 1-2 dribbles as a slasher and getting to the rim. He gets a lot of rim pressure that way. There isn't a lot of craft. There's not a lot of like pick and roll navigation. He's not exactly like one of the big deceleration guys for me. And he's not a particularly outstanding passer. So, with Ron and especially with Asar, at least that when Asar is cutting and moving around, he's going to make the next pass, and the offense is going to move a little bit that way. With Adou, I'm not sure he's got that in him. So there's definitely some concerns about, if you draft him, are you replicating too many of the skill sets you already have? Where are you going to give him the minutes? Like we talked about with the BPA earlier, if you draft him because you think he's the best player available, but you put him in the G League and he never really gets a chance to like play over Ron or Asar, where does that leave him? And so I like the prospect. He's kind of one of the guys that I would tend to gravitate towards in any draft because I love defensive wings. But I do struggle a little bit with the Pistons in terms of just how are they going to make sure that he has success here.
Yeah, I find myself going back and forth, and kind of like you mentioned earlier with the whole best player available versus fit. Also, Sham, you're hilarious. We're interacting with chat for this live stream, everybody. If you guys have any thoughts, you guys have any prospects you guys want to talk about, prospects you're looking at, let us know. But of course, Sham had to troll and lie about me getting dunked on at some point. But I go back and forth, kind of like you mentioned earlier, where like best player available has to also involve fit, because if the fit is really bad, how much of a chance does he really have to reach the best player available that you think he can eventually reach to? So you got to kind of think both, in my opinion. And it seems like from the scout I talked with today and from what I'm hearing from a lot of people I trust is that he does have a lot of upside. And for me, it's like, okay, well, you're watching these playoffs play out and you're seeing a bunch of guys. If you could just have a bunch of wings that you can just throw at people, a bunch of defenders with versatility you can just throw at people, it seems like it's becoming more and more of a something you're seeing in the NBA now. I feel like that's kind of like a trend you're starting to see. So I get that point. It's just, for me, if you were to take him, I would like him if you took him and then just didn't really have any plans to play him right away, and you're just trying to like develop him behind the scenes. And then maybe you feel like next year, okay, the shot's there. Now we can play him. Now you got three guys, and Ron at this point hopefully has developed his three. And now you have three guys with just crazy defensive versatility, crazy athleticism, crazy strength. You can just throw at people, run in transition, and at least two of them can shoot. Like that is what I assume the idea would be behind drafting him. But I also think that you have to consider, like, I know Fred Vincent is viewed as like, God in the building, but like, how many people or how many prospects do you want to throw at him and say, fix the jump shot? Like, how many people do you want to throw at him, and how realistic that he gets X amount to actually shoot? Like right now, working with Asar, Ron, I think he's even still working with Cade or like a Jaden Ivey. Jaden Ivey still can improve his free throw shooting. Cade can become more consistent as an outside shooter. Like he's working with almost, it feels like damn near the entire roster. So like, how many people do you want to throw at him, and is it reasonable to think he could get it going? But I like you, that type of player I always gravitate towards, because it's like, it's so clear to see how they can contribute to winning. If they can just, if that shot comes around, it would just be, like I said, you have three of those guys you can just throw at people. It's the wing room would be great, but there is definitely risk involved if you don't think his shot is eventually going to come around.
Yeah, it's just a question of, you can carry one or two of those guys on a roster. And the only problem is that you already have two of those guys on the roster. So you can't just be like, oh, we'll just give him these 16 minutes, in a lineup that'll prop him up and have all this shooting around him, because you're already propping, Ron and Asar up with shooting, so you're just kind of stuck there. And for me, there's still kind of an open question of how much this front office and this staff wants to use the G League team, because we haven't really seen them send anyone down there yet.
Right,
so, yeah. I think that was mostly because last year we had, we had time for guys to play. Ron definitely had time, and Bobby obviously got hurt, so I don't think they wanted to on-ramp him into the G League right away. But I think that's an open question too of where they think the integration with the G League is, and because I think if you draft another guy like this, you're going to have to have a plan to move him back and forth and build some stuff in the cruise for him.
All right, fair enough. Let us know down below. Would you guys draft Adou Theiro, let us know. But coming up, we'll talk about Ryan Kalkbrenner, who could he be? It sounds like he has floor spacing potential. Could that be the pick where the Pistons draft a big man that eventually is able to shoot down the line and provide some spacing? Talk about that coming up. Today's episode is brought to you by Wayfair. There's nothing like stepping into your own outdoor space and feeling like you've escaped to a personal oasis. If you're wanting to update your patio this season, Wayfair has made it so easy to turn that space into what you feel like is yours. Comfortable, stylish, and ready for the summer. Wayfair has everything you need to level up your outdoor space. You have outdoor bars, you have fire pits, you have hot tubs, and yes, even the perfect string lights to set the vibe. It's like giving your backyard that resort feel without the resort price tag. The delivery is free, fast, and totally hassle-free, even with the larger items. Now, whether I'm deciding to host friends or just unwinding to read a book outside, it genuinely feels like it's my own private retreat. Don't wait. Make your outdoor space your dream oasis today with Wayfair and enjoy it all summer long. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop a huge outdoor selection. That's Wayfair, Wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home with Wayfair. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. That's another great way to support the podcast. I just got Sham's notification that a trade happened while we're recording. Is this? Oh, this is Phoenix. They're acquiring another second-round pick for 2 future second-round picks. All right, nothing to do with the Pistons. Anyways, all right, let's go ahead and get into the next prospect here. This is Ryan Kalkbrenner. Now, how we're going to read the verdict from ESPN here. They say one of the most efficient and valuable players in college basketball over the last several seasons, leading Division I in dunks by a wide margin. Kalkbrenner is a known player whose occasional flashes of floor spacing potential add a valuable dimension to his game. He might have limitations, but his size, length, and consistency on both ends of the floor will be appealing to his team seeking rookie contract depth at the center position. Now, obviously, this is a guy, ESPN has him at 7'1", 257. They have him as the 5th best available prospect heading into the second round. Hal, where do you stand with this prospect?
Yeah, he's just the kind of guy who we've seen him for several years now. He's been pretty consistent for several years now, and he just does most of the stuff you'd ask your 7'1" guy, 7'2" guy to do. Right? He's going to protect the rim, around the rim. You know, he's going to be mostly a drop big. You know, he'll do some screen and roll stuff. He's not much of like a post hub. That's the one like offensive area where I wish Kalkbrenner had shown just a little bit more. You know, he's kind of a 1-to-1 assist to turnover guy. But he has shown a little bit of three-point shooting. It's never been crazy volume. It's never been crazy efficiency, but it's been, you know, it's been there. There's a framework there. The free throw percentage has been around like 70-ish%, and that's not, you know, it's not high enough where you're like, oh yeah, he's definitely going to be an amazing shooter, but it's also not terrible. But he's a guy who, you know, that if somebody switches on the pick and roll, right, he'll go on the post and mash him up. He can catch a lob and he can do all that kind of stuff. So the kind of guy where you bring him in, you have a pretty reliable framework, knowing what you want to do with him. And then, you know, if it turns out the shooting hits or, you know, maybe there's a little bit more passing shots or something, you know, maybe he can grow into a little bit more. But you have a pretty good idea of what you get when Kalkbrenner comes in, because he's been doing this for several years now for a very good Creighton team.
So is he more of a ready now impact player? Like, is he someone who could play right now, opposed to like who we talked about earlier, where you maybe want to take some time with him? Is this more of a ready now player?
I think so. And I think if you're going to draft Kalkbrenner, you know, you're probably saying you don't want to bring in any other big men, you know, in free agency or anything. That's somebody you're probably going to want to give some rotation minutes to.
All right, and of the 5 players we're going to talk about today, or prospects we're going to talk about today, where do you have him? If all 5 of these guys were available, where do you have him ranked as you'd most want the Pistons to select, 1 through 5?
4 maybe. All these guys are pretty much in the same tier for me. You know, as far as like my board goes, so I wouldn't be worried about drafting any of them. And there's another half a dozen guys in that tier too. So. I'd be totally fine with him or any of the other guys we'll talk about.
Fair enough. Mr. Jones says he wants Fleming or Kalkbrenner. So let's go ahead and talk about Rasheer Fleming from St. Joseph's. ESPN has him as the second best available prospect going into the second round. We know, or at least I know, I'm aware, I'm sure you know how, that friend of the podcast, Bryce Simon, is very high, apparently, I've heard, on Fleming. He really, really likes him.
Bryce is a big Rasheer guy.
Yeah, big, 6'8", 232 pounds. ESPN verdict, there's a premium on length, shooting, and potential defensive versatility in the NBA, and Fleming could bring all three to a team with patience to develop his awareness and technique defensively while the game hopefully slows down for him offensively. He struggled badly and late into the season, but his relative youth and trajectory at St. Joseph's leaves room for optimism about his potential. So this is a player I see a lot of Pistons fans. I just said Bryce is really high on him, but I've seen a lot of Pistons fans hoping that the Pistons get a chance to take him here. Now, whether he actually would be available at 37, who knows? But if he was available, what are they getting out of Fleming if they were to take him?
He's your bigger power forward, your bigger wing forward, who should be able to do the floor spacing and the defensive side of the ball. And then you're kind of hoping that he can continue to mature and connect some of the other skills together. You're talking 6'10", 7'6" wingspan. So really long, pretty good athlete. A guy you would expect to be able to defend, threes and fours, and maybe do some like small five or at least switch on to fives. Which obviously you have a lot of wings on this roster, but that's kind of the area that you're a little light on, is those bigger wings. You don't really have somebody behind Tobias in the rotation, especially Fontecchio is not playing well. So Fleming's the guy that I think just most obviously fits a need, and he shot 39% from three this year. So there's a pretty good chance he's going to be a good floor spacer. He could certainly be a guy who lurks around in the corners and just makes shots and kind of almost like the Tony Snell archetype of like, he's just a big wing. He'll sit there, he'll space. He won't make too many mistakes. Not much of like a playmaker or creator right now, but maybe that can mature. And then, on the opposite end, he's probably a little more impactful than I think someone like Snell was, right? I think he can compete at a pretty high level, protect the rim. He rebounds like crazy. Just a really physical player in that regard. So of all the guys we'll talk about today, I think he's the most obvious, like plug and play, fills a need for the Pistons.
So my question is, I see a lot of people that I trust in the community talk very highly of this player. Why is he available at this point? What is it about him that's made him fall to the second round? Why I feel like a lot of people talk him really highly.
There's not a lot of the creation, right? So that's one thing. There's also a little bit of question of he was in kind of a weaker conference at St. Joseph. So like, how much of his stats is him beating up on players who just like really couldn't compete with him physically, and how much of that is going to kind of go away at the NBA? I think that's a big question for some scouts. Is just you always got to be careful when you have some of these bigger athletes and they're in there and you're playing Charleston on a regular game, and that's not the same level of competition that you get if you're playing at Duke. So if you believe that some of those stats are overinflated, especially like he didn't have a super high free throw rate, and that's one of the things where if you're going to be the athlete dominating smaller competition, that's kind of one of the areas you would normally expect to see somebody thrive in. So it's just a lot of little margin things where people I think don't see a very high ceiling. And then if you are questioning at all whether or not he's really as athletic or really as skilled defensively or anything because you haven't seen it against the right level of competition, then you start just kind of knocking him down your board a little bit.
All right, so before we get to the final two prospects, I do want to answer some questions that we've seen in the chat. First question I want to ask you, Hal, do you think any of these prospects that are available from in the second round, do you think any of them are enticing enough to where you think the Pistons should trade up or have a level of interest to trade up to try and nab one of them? Or do you think it's not worth it at this point to stay at 37 and whoever's there, take them?
I think at this point, the price to trade up is, another second round pick, or it's Marcus Sasser, or maybe it's flipping someone like Fontecchio's contract for somebody else who has like another year of similar money. And maybe that's okay with you. Depending on who that player is. So I think at this point, if you have someone you really want and they've locked in on, The reasonable pricing that I think would cost, I think that's totally okay. It's not like somebody's gonna be like, oh, we need a first round pick, or you got to give us Ron Holland to move up or anything crazy like this. It's not what it is in the first round. So at this point, you can probably hand somebody the like $5-6 million you get in tradable cash too, and move up 3 or 4 spots if you had to. So
you think if they moved up to get Fleming, would you be okay with that?
Yeah. Okay. If they say, hey, we'll give you another second round pick in 2027 or whatever they've got and move up, that would be totally fine.
All right, and then the next question I want to answer is from Sham. He says, "Who's left on the board that has an elite translatable skill, even if there are massive holes elsewhere in their game?" Sounds like that's what you were kind of saying about Fleming, right?
Yeah, I think Fleming's one of those guys where I'm just pretty confident that he's going to come in and hit threes and compete defensively. We talked last time I was on about Renaud, right? And Renault, excuse me. And okay, you have a big man who can shoot and do some ball handling, and whether or not he can defend or anything else, I'm pretty confident he's going to give you an offensive wrinkle that you don't have. One of the other names we had was Sion James, and I'm pretty sure that dude's gonna compete defensively at the guard position. So I think all these guys here, the reason they're in the draft in the first place, is that they've got something they can hang their hat on, right? Theiro, for example, is the athleticism, the defense, it's going to translate. It's just something. It's just whatever else happens on the other end.
All right, fair enough. Coming up, we'll get to our final 2 prospects. We'll talk about Renaud, who we talked about last week, I believe. He's still available. We'll talk about him. And then also, like Hal just pointed out, Sion James. Could he be a good fit for the Pistons at 37 if he is available? We'll talk about that coming up. Today's episode is brought to you by Skims. When I found out Skims was making underwear for men, I was intrigued. I've heard so much about their quality from friends and family, so I had to give it a try. And let me tell you, it lives up to the hype. I've always had issues with underwear, fit, comfort, and just finding the right style for me. Skims changed all of that. I know Sham's going to love this ad read in the comments right now. He's probably dying of laughter. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. When I tried Skims, the boxer briefs, I'm absolutely hooked. I have a few pairs of them. I use them. I love them. I think they fit amazingly. They're super comfortable. I think you guys will really love them as well. These are perfect for my active lifestyle. They move with me, never lose their shape, and stay in place all day long. Whether I'm working out or just running errands, they're the most comfortable and reliable underwear I've ever owned. Plus, the lightweight material feels amazing, almost like you're wearing nothing at all. So shop Skims Men's at skims.com. Let them know that we sent you after you place your order. Select podcast in the survey and select my show, Locked On Pistons, in the drop-down menu that follows. So again, shop Skims Men's at skims.com. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. That's another great way to support the podcast. All right, Hal, we've already talked about Renaud, so let's leave him for last, because people already, if you've been listening to the podcast, you already got a good idea on him as a prospect. Let's talk about Sion James. I have not heard about this player until you brought him up to me today. I'm trying to find him on ESPN. Has him as the 15th ranked prospect available right now. He went to Duke, 6'5", 218. Their verdict on him: James played a similar role for the Blue Devils as he likely will at the next level, guarding multiple positions, staying active off the ball, and looking more than willing to do the little things. He is not exceptionally long, but he fits a unique mold physically, which could be an asset for a team looking for utility player, especially if he takes another step as a spot up threat. So looks like he's more of he looks like he's maybe a bigger guard. Is 6'5", 218. He looks like he has some strength to him. What is it about him that makes you think he would be a good fit for the Pistons at 37?
A couple things. First of all, he's got that like Lou Dort build to him. Dort's a little longer wingspan wise, but he's 6'6" and just built like a truck. 220, all muscle, extremely high compete level, and the big thing is that he just played, as the ESPN thing said, he played the exact role at Duke that you'd want him to play for the Pistons, where he's playing off flag and Knipple and Malawak, and just like connecting all the dots, defending at the point of attack at a high level. passing pretty well. Kept a nice 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio going. Didn't take a huge volume of threes, but hit him at 40%. Hit his free throws at 81%. Makes enough of his layups. He's not like an amazing finisher, but walked out of that season with over a 63 true shooting percentage. And just fills a role quite obviously with a high compete level, and just was an extremely mature leader for a very young team as well. I don't think that team really needed some kind of like culture setter or anything, but it's always nice to know that you have these veterans that are gonna come in and do things the right way, on and off the court. And Sion James was one of those guys that everything you heard about him from a character perspective was awesome, and then he just backed it up by being extremely useful, pretty much in all areas of the floor. And when you're looking at a Pistons team that maybe needs another guard, maybe not a true point guard, maybe you want Ivy to do some of those ball handling duties next year, but you're looking kind of at the roster and you say, I need somebody who can play next to Jaden and just kind of keep the ball pressure up defensively, hit some shots as Jaden passes the ball out. Sion James is the guy that I think would really complement that kind of need. So, I think he's pretty interesting, and the lack of like star potential, I think, is something that, again, people just don't really gravitate towards those players. But when we look at players like Lou Dort, similar scout, someone like Ryan Nembhard, right, was kind of a similar thing in college, where it's like, yeah, he's just it's a good quality player, but I don't see anything, and then it turns out he's one of the most important people in a finals team. So these are the kind of guys I think that are really fun bets to make in the second round.
Before you go on, shout out to my guy B Rose, shouting me out over here with the wisdom teeth surgery. Brandon, I feel a lot better now. If only your show was a week later, I would have went to it. B Rose, he's a musician. He's a big time musician. He does a bunch of shows, travels. He's big time. So make sure you guys go check him out if you're in the live show. But all right, so Reynaud is someone who ESPN has as the best option available. I feel like I haven't seen almost any Piston fan, anyone in the community, not like this dude. It seems like everyone would love it if he's on the team. We talked about him last week. Hal, go ahead and just give the final pitch to why he would be a good fit for this team.
Yeah, he's a 7-footer that shoots. It's just really easy. Maybe there are the defensive issues and stuff. Maybe the flaws are too much, and he's not an NBA guy. It's totally possible. But when you're looking at a league where you need offensive advantages, anywhere you can find them right now, you have a 7-footer that shoots threes and like really shoots, not just like, oh, he makes 34%. Like Kalkbrenner we talked about, where it's like, maybe the really wide open pick and pops and stuff. Maybe he'll nail just enough of those. No, this dude's a shooter, a movement shooter, a guy who can attack off the catch and leverage that shooting. And so it's a gamble that could definitely raise the ceiling on some lineups, and a gamble that if it doesn't work out, I don't think you're going to feel bad about putting some assets on the table and saying, I want to try this out.
All right, so before we wrap this up, I do want to open it up to the chat. If there's any prospect that we did not bring up that you'd like to get Hal's thoughts on, let us know in the comments right now. We'll talk about them real quickly. I know Sean, he brought up, I believe he's talking about Kobe Bria. Hal, what do you think about him?
Shoots the ball. That's what he does. And at volume, shoots the ball, makes free throws, just doesn't do a lot else. So, if you look at someone like Malik Beasley and you say, okay, I just want more of that on my team, then you might go for someone like Brea. And that, again, this is an area of the draft where I think there's a bunch of guys that make a ton of sense, and it's all just what you want to do. And so if the Pistons want to go for Brea, I have no problem with that.
Do you think his shooting is going to translate? Do you have any questions about him being a lethal shooter at the next level?
He's a monster shooter. There's no questions. He shot almost 44% on legit volume, and he makes every free throw he takes. He's a shooter.
So I'm assuming that it must be his defense must be like horrible if he's
and he's not much of a creator. He's not an amazing defender. He's not a super physical player. He's one of your classic T-Rexes where he's got a negative wingspan. So he's there to shoot the ball. That's what he does.
What would be his max outcome? Someone who what would be like?
You're hoping for Malik Beasley. Yeah,
Malik?
you're hoping for just a guy who comes in and sets the world on fire, and that makes up for all the other stuff.
All right, next one. Gemini says, "Get Johnny Broom." What do you think about him?
I'm not a huge Broom guy. I understand the appeal in that, like, he is a really good passer for what he is. He's got the physicality that I think will translate to the NBA, where if you put him on some kind of mismatch and just let him back somebody down, he's going to score or he's going to draw a double and he'll make a kick out. I just don't really think that he's got the kind of movement skills that are needed to play defense at the NBA level. And I don't really buy the shooting at the distant shooting, the 3-point shooting, as being really trustworthy, especially considering he's a much older prospect. So I just think he wouldn't excite me as much as some of the other guys. I get the pitch, but
another question. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. It's Second. Says, if Fleming or Kalkbrenner is selected, do you expect the Pistons to make a move in free agency for a power forward position, or do they make a move for other needs?
I think they can fit either one of those guys onto the roster and then go make whatever other move they want. Right. I don't think when you're talking about a second round draft pick that you are changing your free agency plans in any way. Right. I think if you've gone out there and you said, hey, there's a power forward that we really want to target, you're going to go target him whether or not you bring in Fleming. And if there's a center that you really want, then Kalkbrenner becomes a G League guy that you bring in for, in case of emergency, and you go get that center. So I don't think any of these guys are a level of investment where you're gonna stop doing other plans.
I do want to ask you this. We had Ant on the podcast, Ant Wright on the podcast, I believe 2-3 days ago. First of all, his player comparisons were just I was crying of laughter.
I caught a couple of those, yeah.
But he said that he thinks there should be players at 37 that should be much more capable of contributing than Bobby Klintman was last year. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the guys we talked about today are probably a little more capable. They're all older than Klintman was, so that's the case. And I think most of them are a little more physically ready too. So I'm still excited to see what Bobby can do. But I think all these guys, he would have been in this range, in this tier for me as well. So.
All right, and then the final question we'll answer is this one. I believe is Danny Phantom. I like the name. Actually, I have to put this up here. Hal looks like a low-budget Jared Goff. I think you've gotten that comparison before, haven't you?
I got any low melanin player. Get them all.
Danny Phantom says, is there any positives to just trading the pick? I actually thought so. My prediction was the Pistons were not going to pick at 37. They're either going to trade up or trade out of this. I didn't think they would make this pick. So I think there is a positive to it. But what do you think? Do you think there's any positives or any likelihood that they just trade out of this pick?
It wouldn't shock me at all. That was my when people were asking me for predictions before the draft, that was my prediction, is that they don't pick at 37. Whatever happens, they don't pick at 37. And that's not because I had any intel or anything. That's the kind of thing that happens in the second round. When all you have is a second round pick, everything's on the table. So if you want to say, hey, I think the next draft is better, and just swap it for somebody else's 2026 pick, go ahead. This is a draft, and this is an area of the draft where I don't think you can be too attached to anything.
All right, and the last thing I want to ask you, this is non-Pistons related. I need you, first of all, Alan. Alan says in the chat, who has the most lookalikes I've ever seen. That's not true. People just lie about my lookalikes. It's just any light-skinned dude with a big forehead, if he has a beard, light-skinned forehead and has a beard, all of a sudden he's me. So I just don't agree with that. But I have to ask you, this is not Pistons related. Maybe people are interested in this.
Okay.
Yang Hanson, listen, they picked him at 16. Everyone says it was the largest reach of the draft, right?
Yeah.
So I haven't watched much of him at all before. So I'm like, okay, let's go figure this guy out, because 7 foot, 7'1", whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, let's go check him out. And apparently he has a huge fan base. I'm like, okay, let's go check him out. I've been watching as much of him as I can over the last 24 or how long has it been since the draft? 16 hours or something.
Yeah.
Listen, I saw him immediately. I see him making passes at his size at the high post, And I'm like, I want this dude to be so good because he seems like he has good IQ. It seems like he processes really well, makes the right decision, has good passing vision as a big. I want him to be good so bad. So tell me, is there any? It seems like the whole draft community is like they drafted him way, way too early. Is there any likelihood? Is there any pathway to where he becomes a good basketball player, or is this just a major miss from the Pelicans, or not Pelicans, Trailblazers?
I don't think it's a major miss. I think there's a couple things going on here. First, the skill is obvious, right? The passing is really great. The thing is, of course, that when you're in the CBA, the Chinese Basketball Association, the competition level there is non-existent. So everything you see, you have to take with a grain of salt. You have to look for other things. He played in summer league with Team China last year and looked pretty good. But like, you're looking for every scrap of film you can get on these guys when they come out of the CBA, because the competition level is very low. The other thing is, you really want to root for them just because China hasn't really had a player in a while, right? Not really since Yao Ming that I can think of. And obviously that's a huge basketball addicted community in China. So having a representative from them in the league would be a wonderful thing. So I root for him for that reason, if nothing else. And I do think that if you're Portland and you see this guy who can be a creative hub, who is big and should be able to do some rim protection stuff, and that Klingon, the one thing he really isn't is an offensive weapon. Like, he's a good pick and roll big and a pretty good dribble handoff creator, but he's not a go scorer himself type big. So you want something else as a counter to that. That makes sense to me. The big question here is, why did you pick him when you picked him, right? And I don't have an answer to that. I don't know if there was someone else somewhere at 18, 22 where they were like, we got to go beat this guy, beat this team to the punch and take him early. We've seen this before with other prospects, and sometimes it's like, yeah, you just outbid yourself, and you'd better be right if you do that. So, I hope he's good for his own sake, because you also don't want to see these players get labeled as a bust and have that chase them their whole career. But it puts a lot of pressure on him and a lot of pressure on the Blazers to get it right.
Yeah, I see that he's people say he's really skillful offensively. So is it just defense? He's just slow? Is that what it is? He's
a 7-footer, right? So you're playing him in a drop situation. He's got some athleticism to him. I mean, he moves pretty well. He's got some fun stuff, and he did look pretty good, as I understand it, in some of the combine stuff and some of the private workouts. So, he's not just the worst player on earth or anything, and it's nothing like that. It's just a pretty curious case of, why did you take, a guy that most people had at the Pistons range, okay, he's 33rd on my board. Why did you take him at, was it 16? So, again, it's what's the story here? Who else did you think was bidding against you? And, because if you wanted him, why didn't you try and trade back another 5 spots? Why didn't you keep moving and just keep researching? Who else was there? And maybe there was someone who also loved him and was willing to take him at 18. So I just don't know that.
All right, so we'll wrap it up there. You guys can go ahead and go ahead and write it down. I'm a Yang Hanson guy now. I want him to be good so bad. He got me as soon as I saw the passing and some of the plays he was making. I was like, oh, this is a big guy who reads the floor well. I love that. I love this kind of player. So I go ahead. I'm hoping that he's really good. We'll see who the Pistons select at 37. Should be plenty of options. Maybe they don't end up selecting at 37. That's also a possibility too. We'll wait, find out tonight at 8. I appreciate all of you guys who came in for the live recording of the show. All of you guys who listen to the podcast. Appreciate all of you guys. Appreciate all the support from all the everydayers. Thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Thank you, Hal, for coming on very last minute.
Absolutely.
And talking the draft with us. It's always a lot of fun to have you on.
My pleasure.
But we'll see what happens. Thank you guys for tuning in. Stay safe out there. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Peace out, everybody.